So we're in your United States history book. We're on chapter 9. The last section is going to be a long section, be a couple videos here. It's going to be going over the War of 1812. A lot of people don't really know much about this war. And sometimes this war is like, should this war have happened or not? And when you're looking at it, you wonder what good came of this war. But as you see, you'll see there's great patriotism during the War of 1812 as America coming together against that fight against Great Britain attacking us again, and basically starting with the impressment of our seamen. And in the midst of all this, we have the war going on with England and France. So let's talk about the War of 1812. We're going to, first of all, we need to focus on Madison becoming the 4th president. Thomas Jefferson decides not to go on for another term. And Madison has new trade policies. Remember that Embargo Act, the dumbest act that Jefferson did, you know, so Madison's going to have to figure this trade policies out with France and Great Britain. On to Napoleon. Napoleon wants to be a friend of the United States, but guess what? He's going to deceive us, of course, as he always does. That's one of his motives in ruling the world, right? On to the war hawks at that time. The war hawks are going to be those that are standing up for going to war. And now we're going to have a lot of problems with Native Americans, especially as Great Britain comes and the British come and sneak in and stir up the Native Americans to fight against the settlers. The Battle of Tippecanoe in Harrison, you know, where he becomes a hero at the Battle of Tippecanoe. And on to Congress declaring war. And then we'll go on to the next video and we're going to go over the war. This is the War of 1812. James Madison becomes president. James Madison becomes the 4th president of the United States. In 1808, Jefferson was tired of politics, remember? Especially the Embargo Act that everyone hated that he had made. Right before he left, he actually repealed the Embargo Act. And so he wanted Madison to succeed him because Madison politically was on for most of Thomas Jefferson's ideas, of course, because Madison was a Republican. The Republicans easily defeated Charles C. Pinckney. Remember I told you he was defeated before? Ran for president again, but defeated Charles C. Pinckney again, I said. Now, Madison's role in the Constitutional Convention. Remember I said I think I said he was a signer of the Constitution. He's not only a signer of the Constitution, he was the father of the Constitution, putting together most of the Constitution there when he was much younger. So this gave him an important position, and he was well qualified then for president because everyone knew James Madison and everybody was reverent towards the Constitution. He was a very frail looking man. In fact, they called him Little Jemmy. His name was James, so they called him President Little Jemmy because he was short and he was small and he was frail, but he was a strong leader and he had very keen political insight. So that's James Madison, our 4th president. Here's a picture of Charles Pinckney. Keeps running for president. Revised trade policies were adopted. In 1809, the Congress repealed this Embargo Act, remember, as Thompson did, which everyone hated, and because we couldn't trade with anybody. So this was replaced by what was called the Non-Intercourse Act. Here we have the Embargo Act, no trade. Then we have the Non-Intercourse Act, and that basically, we could trade with anyone but England. So it opened trade to everybody, but we couldn't trade with England. This forbade trade with Great Britain, but reopened commerce. And then it was replaced by another bill. So there's 1, 2, 3, this is the 3rd bill, and there'll be 2 of these. Macon's bill, 2 of these bills. So we're trying to figure this out. Basically, Madison is trying to figure out how are we going to deal with our trade here, and that we won't go bankrupt, and that so many people won't lose their jobs, right? So he replaced it by the Macon Bill, and he did a good job in 1810, and this opened trade with all nations. But it had a clause, and the clause that he put in here was basically that to cease to violate the neutral commerce in the United States, America would reinstitute no trade. So basically he was saying to France and to England, if if you trade with us, you can trade with us. If you decide to trade with us, and England starts with trade, you both can trade with us. But, you cannot attack our ships and everything. So if France trades with us, then England trades with us, we'll have a treaty within the midst of that, right? So he was trying to deal with both France and Great Britain, about what was going on. This aided commerce, but the embargo was replaced, basically replaced by each one of this, and now we have the Macon Bill. So we have one, just remember, embargo, Non-Intercourse Act, onto the Macon Bill. So basically Madison trying to figure out how are we going to deal with trading with these countries that were at war. Well, Napoleon saw, that's kind of a loophole here in their trade agreement. So Napoleon says, yeah, I will basically stop trade between the United States. If you stop trade between the United States and Great Britain, and Great Britain will say, I will trade with you and I'll be at peace with you. So Napoleon's idea possibly could spark a war between Great Britain and the United States. So Napoleon was looking, man, if the United States went against Great Britain, it'd be helping me out a bit, right? And so he wrote to America and he said, His Majesty, that's Napoleon, His Majesty really loves Americans, and we want to be friends with America. That's Napoleon. So Napoleon claims that he was going to revoke the Berlin and Milan decrees, which he had put before, and that we would be friends, and that France would not even touch their ships, on the condition that Great Britain would renounce their orders and revert to no trade policy. So basically he said, if Great Britain, we won't trade with America if you don't trade with America. So, we can work this all out, and, we'll let America be neutral. So President Madison had no choice to adhere to his terms of the Macon Bill, saying, okay, France, you not trade with us, and we'll have this idea with France. Then England has to do the same thing. So he had to talk to England, because basically Napoleon knew that Madison had a loophole there that he didn't know about. I like this picture of Napoleon. It says, I have learned that men will die for ribbons. Anyway, Napoleon. So President Madison's Macon Bill. Everyone said, is this a mistake? So now we have so many bills. It's crazy. So the Macon Bill gave Napoleon his deceptive stand. And now Madison sent word to Great Britain in 3 months' time, if the order was not repealed, since France already put forth their order, then America would cut off trade with Great Britain. Said, okay, France is saying no trade with them, then no trade with Great Britain, right? But Napoleon had no intention of abiding by his agreement at all. He basically was deceiving America. So the French ships still were seizing American cargo on the seas, and they still were doing the same. They didn't stop. But Madison felt the United States had changed foreign policy too many times. Basically, I think Madison couldn't figure out what they're going to do next with this trade thing. So there would be no respect among nations, or even with their own citizens, if they went and said, basically said it was okay with Great Britain now and change it again. So in March 1811, trade was cut off with Great Britain, and France said, okay, you can cut off trade with us, so we won't trade with you if they don't trade with you. So it was cut off. So this bill here says, let me go over it a little bit so you understand. Was introduced by Nathaniel Macon, chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee in 1810, authorized the president to reopen trade with Britain and France. However, in the event that if either nation formally agreed to respect the U.S. neutral rights at sea, that means failed to respect the United States, the U.S. would prohibit trade with that nation's foe. So basically saying, you know, if you are going to attack us, you know, basically we'll trade with your enemy. But it was basically putting the two countries, you know, both of them, you know, having to do the same thing, right? So the Americans demanded war. So Madison correctly sensed the mood now. War was inevitable way before this time with Great Britain, because they would not stop the impressment of our sailors and stuff. They were actually stealing our citizens to fight on their ships. So the policies of compromise hadn't worked. Our national honor now was at stake. And there was a new generation of representatives that came into Congress, and these new breed of statesmen, they weren't the old Federalists and the old Republicans anymore. They were from the rural America and expanding to become a great nation. And they were like war hawks, you know, so they were saying, no, you know, we can't compromise with Great Britain. We can't compromise with France. They were called the war hawks. There's a couple of them. Henry Clay, these are older pictures of them. They were very young at this time. Henry Clay was of Kentucky. Here's Henry Clay. And this is John C. Calhoun of South Carolina. We'll see him way later on. You know, both of them, they were called war hawks because they believed America's honor must be defended, that we must defend American honor. They were young and they were fearless and they're very patriotic guys. They would play a crucial role in shaping America for the next half of century. And America would become a great nation. The Warhawks basically saying, we are a country and we need to be honored. We need to be honorable, and we need to take honor. We need to be the country that we're supposed to be. And then, of course, there were the problems with the Native Americans. Remember, the British were stirring them up. So our expansion produced a growing unrest with the Native Americans. There was a steady flow of settlers into their hunting grounds, and many of the settlers came in and cheated them out of their land. So George Washington and John Adams and Thomas Jefferson made honest efforts. They wanted to protect the Native Americans' rights, all of them, all of those presidents. But they were not able to stop these aggressive frontiersmen who were forcing the Native Americans out of their land and out of the Ohio Valley. So in treating the Native Americans very poorly. Let me see, I'm kind of crooked here, aren't I? Anyway, okay. So the prophet, change this a little bit, make it a little straighter. There we go. The prophet and Tecumseh, who are they? So the prophet, these are two Native Americans. In 1805, this guy here was called the prophet. And he was a Shawnee medicine man. He lived 1768 to 1813, right here. And this is Tecumseh, and he was a Shawnee chief. They're both Shawnee. And they had a call. Basically, the British had come in and got them all riled up, but they also saw that a lot of the people that of European descent, white people, were moving in and taking over their land. And so there was a call for Native Americans to remove all outside influence and to live their traditional ways away from the white society that had been coming in. So, and so they traveled, both of these guys together, they traveled from Wisconsin to Florida, convincing the tribes to join their confederacy to drive the settlers out of the land. And Tecumseh centered in Indiana Territory, and there, having his Shawnee group, basically saying we need to have an uprise and rise above what's going on here and attack these colonists, attacked the United States of America. I'm not colonists anymore, but so-called, going all the way back to colonist times. And so we call this Tippecanoe. He lived in the Indiana Territory on the Tippecanoe to the Wabash River. It's where the Indians were living, the Native Americans were living. William Henry Harrison, and he was a general, and we call him, he'll be noted for the Battle of the Tippecanoe. There's a picture of him here, Battle of the Tippecanoe. He set out to destroy Tecumseh's conspiracy with the troops. On November 1811, Harrison's troops camped on the Tippecanoe River. And he knew, here we have this uprising. The British have come in, and we have Tecumseh, and we have the prophet leading the Native Americans on a raid. And they were coming in to raid these settlers that had settled on this land. There was a fierce battle as Harrison forced the Native Americans to retreat. And then he crushed the Confederacy of Natives. But many tribes continued to raid. The frontiersmen believed the British and the Canadian and the Spanish had stirred up the Native Americans in the first place. So here we have, and we'll have Tecumseh actually at this time, the first battle, Tecumseh will be killed, so we have the Battle of Tippecanoe. And later on, William Henry Harrison would become a president, for the shortest president, because he ends up getting the flu and dies, but his thing would be Tippecanoe and Tyler too, but that's in the future. But that's William Henry Harrison defeating this rising of Native Americans against the settlers. So Congress then declares war, the War of 1812. The summer of 1812, the British refused to repeal orders until Napoleon repealed. So now we have basically Madison said to the British that we will just continue trade with you and with France. Well, the British refused to do anything. So Madison's message to Congress stated 4 reasons for war. Why should we go for war? And a lot of, especially Massachusetts, did not agree that we should go to war. And Connecticut, so there were certain states that did not want to go to war. So he said, first of all, the biggest reason was the impressment of American soldiers, or American seamen. The sailors were being taken and used by the British. And also the violation of American rights in territorial waters. Our ships should be able to go into these waters without the British ships taking our ships away and stealing our ships and our cargo and our sailors. So the violation of neutral trade routes by the orders of council, they were violating the neutral trade as we were a neutral country. And they were also stirring up our Native Americans. They were sending British soldiers, British spies, such people into our country, stirring up Native Americans to fight against us. So those were the 4 reasons to declare war. But there were communication problems. We don't have telephones in that time, and we don't have, we don't even have telegrams. So it took a long time for us to communicate, the Northeast opposed the war, and the South and the North favored the war. So had we had 20th century communication at that time, and we had email and telephones then, there most likely would not have been a war. Because on June 6, 1812, the British did announce the orders of council would be revoked, and they said they would revoke this as Napoleon did. So, but the message didn't get to America until June 23rd, and we already declared war on June 6th, 1812. So that was a bad deal. So on June 18th, the United States didn't know that in England, they were basically going to say, okay, we'll announce that our orders, and we'll do the same thing that Napoleon's doing, and we will not impress your soldiers. But the declaration of war had already been made. And so basically we had declared war because they had not answered us, So here's some pictures here. This is Tecumseh, and this is the British here, the head, and this is onto, we're going to talk about Andrew Jackson and, well, anyway, and Dolly Madison, I think. But these are some for the War of 1812. There's going to be a lot of characters in the War of 1812. Let's finish this up here. So Madison was reelected. You know, so the war was the main issue in the election, and some of the states, especially Massachusetts here and Daniel Webster, they opposed the War of 1812, basically saying this is not a really reason to go to war. You know, as for in the midst of all this whole thing between France and England, and so a lot of people, especially the northern states up there, did not support James Madison's decision to go to war. So the New England Republicans supported DeWitt Clinton of New York as a presidential candidate. But Madison had way more votes. Madison, of course, he was the father of the Constitution. And so Madison was reelected a few months after the war was declared. So the war was declared first, and then he was reelected. So Massachusetts, Connecticut opposed the war, and on to the advantages. Let's talk about the advantages. Great Britain now was too busy fighting Napoleon to concentrate in America. So that was an advantage. We could go to war with Great Britain right now, but they were also fighting Napoleon. The disadvantage would be the financing of the war was very difficult because foreign trade had stopped and declined with the tariffs and such, and money was pretty scarce. The Republican Congress had not renewed the charter with the National Bank. It expired in 1811, so they didn't even have a bank going yet. And so also during the presidency of Thomas Jefferson had made our military so, had not supported our military, financing it. So our military was very small. And so the financiers of the Northwest even refused to finance the war. So we would have a problem financing a war, especially the War of 1812. And Great Britain, though, they were too busy fighting Napoleon. So anyway, what would happen? So that's the end of this section. And then we're going to go into our next section where we're going to talk about how the War of 1812 goes, whether it's good or bad. But we're going to find out some certain things. One thing, we're going to talk about Washington, D.C. being attacked and the White House being burned down, and on to New Orleans, and what happens in New Orleans is a big deal. So we'll go on with our next video.